The Inquisitor had seen many things in his 40 years of service to the Emperor. He had witnessed worlds burn, watched saints ascend, and interrogated demons until their essence unraveled. But he had never seen anything like the girl with the scythe who moved faster than his augmented eyes could track, fighting a bloodthirster with nothing but determination and a weapon that violated every known law of Imperial physics. When she finally collapsed, bleeding and exhausted, having somehow survived an encounter that should have ended with her skull decorating Khorne's brass throne, Inquisitor Kalen Vras made a decision that would either earn him sainthood or damnation. He chose to understand her rather than execute her. This is the story of how a huntress from a world that shouldn't exist became the Imperium's most controversial asset. This is the story of Ruby Rose. But it began 3 hours earlier, in the depths of the Underhive, when reality itself fractured. The Webway Gate had been dormant for millennia, buried beneath the ruins of Tertius Magna's lowest levels, forgotten by all save the most obscure Mechanicus data vaults. When it activated without warning, the psychic backlash sent astropaths screaming across 3 sectors, their minds seared by energy that registered as neither warp nor material in origin. Something was coming through, something that should not exist in this reality. Inquisitor Kalen Vras stood before the ancient Eldar construct, his Stormbolter trained on the swirling vortex of red and black that had manifested within its frame. Around him, a kill team of Deathwatch Marines held position, each a veteran of countless Xenos purges, their weapons blessed by the most powerful wards the Ecclesiarchy could provide. "Readings are impossible, my lord," reported Codicier Thrain, the librarian's psychic hood crackling with barely contained energy. "The signature resembles warp travel, but there's no corruption, no taint of chaos. It's as if reality itself is being folded rather than torn." Vros's augmented eye whirred as it focused on the portal, analyzing spectral patterns his mind struggled to comprehend. In his decades of service to the Holy Inquisition, he had witnessed horrors that would drive normal men to madness. This felt different. Not malevolent, but profoundly wrong in its very existence. The vortex pulsed once, twice, then expelled a single figure who tumbled through the air with acrobatic grace, landing in a crouch that somehow managed to look both combat-ready and entirely unprepared for what surrounded her. She was young, perhaps 16 standard years, with black hair tipped in red that defied gravity in a way that suggested either mutation or advanced anti-grav technology. Her clothing was bizarre, a combination of gothic aesthetic and combat practicality that reminded Vras of hive gang fashion, yet clearly served a functional purpose. Most striking was the weapon strapped to her back, a massive scythe that folded impossibly into a compact form, its design incorporating elements that his Mechanicus training insisted violated several laws of physics. But it was her eyes that gave him pause, silver, bright with confusion and mounting alarm as she took in her surroundings. Not the red-tinged madness of chaos corruption, not the cold emptiness of Xenos manipulation, just genuine human fear struggling against determination. She said, her voice carrying an accent Vras had never encountered in all his travels across the Imperium. "This isn't Beacon Academy." The Deathwatch Marines tightened their formation, Stormbolters tracking her every micro-movement. Brother Sergeant Corvin, a space wolf whose hatred of the alien was legendary even among his chapter, growled a warning through his helmet's Vox grill. "Identify yourself, mutant. By whose authority do you trespass in Imperial space?" The girl's hand moved toward her weapon with speed that registered on Vros's augmented perception as genuinely superhuman. Not Astartes level, but far beyond baseline human capability. She froze when a dozen targeting lasers painted her chest, clearly recognizing the universal language of imminent death. "Whoa, okay. Nobody needs to shoot anybody," she said, raising her hands slowly. "My name is Ruby Rose. I'm a huntress in training from Remnant, and I have absolutely no idea how I got here or where here even is." Remnant. The word meant nothing to Vras. Wasn't catalogued in any Imperial records his mind could access through his cerebral implants. Either she was lying, or she truly came from somewhere beyond the Imperium's vast borders. Given the impossible nature of her arrival through a webway gate that should only respond to Eldar psychic signatures, the latter seemed disturbingly plausible. "Search Imperial records," he subvocalized to his retinue's cogitator servitor. "Cross-reference the designation Remnant with all known human worlds, Forge worlds, and Xenos territories." The response came back in seconds. "No match found. You claim to be human," Vras stated, studying her with clinical precision. "Yet you arrive through Xenos technology, wielding weapons of unknown configuration, and display physical capabilities beyond baseline human norms. You will submit to examination, or you will be destroyed. There are no other options in the Imperium of Man. Something shifted in the girl's expression. The fear was still there, but it hardened into something more dangerous. Resolve. I don't know what an Imperium is, she said carefully. Her hand still raised, but her posture subtly adjusting into a combat stance that Vross's tactical training recognized as highly efficient, despite its unfamiliar style. But I'm not submitting to anything until someone explains what's going on. Where am I? How did I get here? And why does everything look like it came from the world's most depressing art museum? Brother Sergeant Corvin's patience, never substantial to begin with, shattered. You dare question the majesty of the God Emperor's domain, heretic? He raised his stormbolter, finger tightening on the trigger. Vross opened his mouth to countermand the order, some instinct warning him that this situation required investigation rather than immediate purging. But he was a fraction too slow. Ruby Rose moved. One moment she stood with hands raised in surrender. The next, she had exploded into motion, her scythe unfolding from its compact form with mechanical precision. Petals of what appeared to be crystallized light scattered in her wake as she used the weapon's recoil mechanism to propel herself sideways. The storm bolter fire that would have obliterated her torso instead vaporizing empty air. She landed 10 meters away, her scythe fully deployed now, a weapon even larger than herself that she wielded with impossible ease. The blade gleamed with a red edge that Vross's augmented vision registered as vibrating at frequencies that could part molecular bonds. I said I don't want to fight, she insisted, her voice steady despite the obvious terror in her eyes as she faced down 8 of humanity's finest warriors. But I will defend myself if you keep trying to kill me, Corvin charged, his power sword igniting with crackling energy. The Space Wolf moved with the enhanced speed of the Adeptus Astartes, crossing the distance in heartbeats. That would have been imperceptible to normal human eyes. Ruby pulled the trigger on her scythe. The gunshot echoed through the chamber as the weapon's recoil launched her into the air, spinning her body in a rotation that built angular momentum beyond what simple human strength could generate. She came down behind Corvin, the scythe blade passing through the space where his neck would have been if his enhanced reflexes hadn't thrown him forward at the last possible instant. She's using kinetic amplification, Codicier Thrain observed, psychic energy gathering around his force staff as he prepared to intervene. The weapon's recoil provides propulsion. Combined with her enhanced speed, it creates an unpredictable combat pattern. The other Deathwatch Marines opened fire. Disciplined volleys of mass-reactive shells designed to eliminate even the most resilient Xenos threats. Ruby became a red and black blur, her semblance activating fully as she accelerated to speeds that made her previous movements look sluggish by comparison. She danced between the bolter rounds, impossible as it seemed, her silver eyes tracking trajectories with processing speed that rivaled a Space Marine's auto-senses. When she couldn't dodge, she used her scythe's blade to deflect the shells, the molecular edge and vibration frequency allowing her to redirect the projectiles, rather than simply absorbing their impact. Vross watched with growing fascination, rather than alarm. This was no demon, no chaos spawn. Her movements, while superhuman, followed physical laws. She was tired. He could see it in the micro-hesitations appearing in her form, the slight tremors as muscles unaccustomed to this level of sustained combat began to fail. She was mortal, limited, and she knew it. Cease fire, he commanded, his voice cutting through the thunder of bolter fire with the authority of decades of service. The Marines obeyed instantly, though Corvin's growl of frustration was audible even through his helmet. Ruby landed in a defensive crouch, breathing heavily, her scythe held in a guard position that suggested formal training in its use. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and Vross noted with interest that her skin showed no sign of the mutations or corruption that typically accompanied such displays of superhuman ability. You fight well, Vross acknowledged, holstering his stormbolter in a gesture of temporary truce. But you are one and we are many. Eventually, you will tire, make a mistake, and die. This serves neither of us. Ruby's chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath. Finally, someone talking sense. Look, I don't want to be here. I was in the middle of a training exercise when everything just fractured. Like reality itself was breaking apart. Next thing I know, I'm falling through some kind of portal and landing in this place that looks like someone designed architecture specifically to make people depressed. The Underhive aesthetic is intentionally oppressive. Vross found himself explaining, against his better judgment. It reinforces the natural order, reminds the masses of their place in the Emperor's design. Ruby lowered her weapon slightly, though she didn't collapse it back into its compact form. That's messed up. Where I come from, we believe in inspiring people, giving them hope to fight against the darkness. Hope is a luxury this galaxy cannot afford, Vross replied. The words automatic after so many years of repeating Imperial doctrine. Yet even as he spoke them, he felt a strange discomfort, as if some part of him recognized the hollowness in the statement. Before Ruby could respond, Codicier Thrain staggered, blood flowing from his nose as his psychic senses overloaded. "My lord," he gasped. "Massive warp disturbance manifesting. Something has taken notice of our guest's arrival." The temperature in the chamber dropped precipitously. Frost formed on metal surfaces as reality itself thinned, the barrier between material and immaterial growing dangerously permeable. Vross had felt this sensation before, during a demon incursion on Cadia itself. His hand moved to the Rosarius at his neck, the conversion field activating as he prepared for the inevitable breach. The walls split open, not physically, but conceptually, revealing spaces that shouldn't exist behind solid ferrocrete. Through these impossible wounds poured entities that defied human comprehension. Bloodletters of Khorne, their brass skin gleaming with reflected firelight that came from no physical source, their hellblades dripping with blood that burned where it struck stone. At their center strode something far worse, a bloodthirster, a greater demon of the blood god, its massive form barely constrained by the dimensions of real space. It turned its bestial gaze upon Ruby, and when it spoke, its voice caused blood to weep from the ears of unprotected humans. "The anomaly," it rumbled, each word a physical force that cracked ferrocrete and bent support beams. "It bears energy unknown to this realm. Khorne demands its essence. Its skull shall rest upon the brass throne." Ruby stared at the demon, her silver eyes wide with a terror that Vross recognized from countless battlefields. This was the moment when most humans broke, when the full horror of chaos revealed itself and shattered whatever illusions of safety the mind had constructed. But she didn't break. Instead, something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but beneath it rose something that reminded Vross uncomfortably of the expression he had seen on the faces of the most dedicated Imperial saints. Not blind faith, but absolute conviction in the righteousness of her purpose. "You're a Grim," she whispered, her voice steadying as she spoke the word that meant nothing to anyone else in the chamber. "A really, really big Grim. But that's what I'm trained to fight." She pulled the trigger on her scythe, the recoil launching her directly at the bloodthirster with suicidal courage. The demon swung its massive axe, reality screaming as the weapon, that had tasted the blood of Imperial champions, cleaved through the space where Ruby had been a microsecond before, but she wasn't there anymore. Her semblance activated fully, petals of crystallized light scattering as she accelerated beyond what even the demon's enhanced perception could easily track. She carved a line across its brass-plated chest, her scythe's molecular edge actually drawing ichor from the entity despite its warp-born resilience. The bloodthirster roared, the sound shattering what remained of the chamber's structural integrity. It backhanded Ruby with casual force, sending her tumbling through the air to impact against a support pillar with bone-breaking force. She hit the ground hard, coughing blood, but somehow pushed herself back to her feet. Her aura flickered visibly now, the silvery energy that protected her clearly depleting with each impact. Yet she raised her scythe again, positioning herself between the demon and the webway gate. "I don't understand what you are," she said, her voice strained but defiant. "But I know evil when I see it, and I'm not letting you through that portal to hurt anyone else." Vross felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of inquisitorial service. Shame. This girl, this child from a reality so foreign that even her fundamental concepts of combat were alien to Imperial doctrine, stood ready to die fighting a demon she couldn't possibly defeat. While he, veteran of countless wars, holder of the Emperor's mandate, had been prepared to execute her moments ago for the crime of being different. "Deathwatch," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Weapons free, for the Emperor and the girl who fights like a saint." The Space Marines opened fire, their storm bolters roaring as blessed ammunition tore into the bloodthirster and its lesser kindred. The demon turned from Ruby, recognizing the greater threat, its hellblade rising to meet the charge of Brother Sergeant Corvin. Ruby didn't waste the opportunity. She reloaded her weapon with practiced speed, the mechanical precision of the motion speaking to countless hours of training, and opened fire. Her rifle rounds weren't blessed by the ecclesiarchy, carried no sacred oils or litanies of banishment, yet they struck with force that staggered lesser demons, the kinetic energy amplified by whatever strange technology her weapon embodied. The battle raged for minutes that felt like hours, Vross coordinated the Deathwatch Marines with tactical precision born of centuries of experience, directing their fire to exploit weaknesses in the demon's defense, while Ruby darted in and out of melee range, her impossible speed and the reach of her scythe, allowing her to strike at joints and gaps in the creature's armor. When Codicier Thrain finally found an opening, his force staff blazing with psychic fire blessed by the Emperor himself, the Bloodthirster's form destabilized. It didn't die. Such entities could not truly be killed in the material realm, but it was banished, sent screaming back to the warp from which it had emerged. The remaining bloodletters, cut off from their master's power, were systematically eliminated by bolter fire and power weapons. When the last demon dissolved into fading warp energy, silence returned to the chamber, broken only by the sound of Ruby collapsing to her knees, her aura completely depleted, her weapon falling from trembling hands. Vross approached her slowly, holstering his weapons in a gesture that he hoped she would interpret correctly. She looked up at him with those silver eyes, fear and defiance warring in equal measure. "You fought well," he said, offering his hand. "For the Emperor and for your own strange creed. That deserves respect, not execution." Ruby stared at his hand for a long moment before taking it, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Does this mean you're not going to shoot me anymore?" "It means," Vross replied carefully, "that you have earned the right to explanation before judgment. Come. We must ascend from this place and determine what is to be done with you." As they prepared to depart the ruined chamber, Ruby looked back at the webway gate, now dormant once more. "Will that portal thing take me home?" Vross followed her gaze, his augmented mind already calculating probabilities and impossibilities. "Perhaps, but first we must understand how you came to be here and—" The webway gate pulsed with crimson light. Once, twice. Then it began to scream. Codicier Thrain staggered, blood streaming from his eyes. "My lord, the gate, it's destabilizing." The Bloodthirster's banishment created a feedback loop. If it collapses, it will tear a permanent warp rift through 3 hive levels. Millions will die. Vross's tactical implants calculated the probabilities in microseconds. Even with orbital bombardment, they couldn't contain the breach in time. The Underhive would become another Eye of Terror, a wound in reality that would consume this world and spread like infection through the sector. "Can it be closed?" he demanded. Thrain's expression gave him the answer before words could, only from the other side. Someone would need to enter the gate, anchor themselves in the space between realities, and collapse it manually. The psychic backlash would— He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Ruby had stopped moving. She stood perfectly still, staring at the crimson glow intensifying behind them, and Vross saw understanding dawn in those silver eyes. Ruby rose. "Don't," he began. "That's what brought me here, isn't it?" Her voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier fear and bravado. "My world, Remnant. When I came through, I must have left the same kind of tear there. That's why the demons came. I broke something when I arrived." "We don't know that," Vross said. But his augmented systems were already confirming her logic. The impossible energies that had manifested during her arrival. The way the warp had reacted to her presence. She was a wound walking. A bridge between realities that shouldn't touch. "You do know." Ruby turned to face him, and the certainty in her expression reminded him of martyrs he'd seen walk willingly into cleansing flames. "I can feel it, like there's a string tied around my soul, pulling in 2 directions. One toward that gate, and one toward home." She looked down at her scythe, at her hands still trembling from combat and exhaustion. "My uncle told me that being a huntress means protecting people, even when they don't know you exist, even when they'll never thank you." A sad smile crossed her face. "Guess that applies to other realities, too." "There has to be another way," Vross heard himself say, shocked by the desperation in his own voice. "We can consult the Mechanicus, reach out to Eldar Farseers." "In how long?" Ruby interrupted gently. "Hours? Days? How many people die while you're looking for another solution?" She straightened her shoulders, and despite her small frame, she seemed to fill the corridor. "Besides, maybe this is why I'm here. Not to fight your war, but to fix what I broke by existing in the wrong universe." Brother Sergeant Corvin stepped forward, and Vross braced for the Space Wolf to demand her sacrifice in the Emperor's name. Instead, the massive warrior removed his helmet, revealing scarred features and eyes that had seen centuries of warfare. "You fight with honor, little huntress," he said, his voice rough with something that might have been respect. "The Allfather would welcome you in his halls." Ruby blinked rapidly, and Vross realized with uncomfortable clarity that she was fighting tears. "Thanks. That means a lot, even if I don't know who the Allfather is." She turned back toward the underhive, toward the screaming gate and certain oblivion. Took one step. Two. "Ruby," Vross called out. And when she paused, he found himself saying words that would have earned him execution in any other circumstance. "Your world, Remnant. It sounds like a better place than this one. Hold on to that. Remember that hope you spoke of. Don't let this darkness be the last thing you see." She looked back over her shoulder, and her smile was genuine despite the tears now flowing freely. "That's really nice of you, Inquisitor. But I've seen darkness before. It's what makes the light matter." Ruby Rose began to run. Her semblance activated one final time, red petals scattering like burning stars as she accelerated down the corridor. Back toward the depths, back toward the screaming gate. Her scythe unfolded in her hands not as a weapon now, but as a key. She'd always known, somewhere deep in her soul, that it was meant for more than just fighting monsters. Vross and his team pursued, but even Astartes' enhanced speed couldn't match her desperate sprint. By the time they reached the chamber, Ruby had already stepped into the vortex, standing at the threshold between realities. The gate's crimson light illuminated her like a saint in stained glass. "Tell my sister I'm sorry I won't make it home for her birthday," she called out, her voice somehow clear despite the dimensional howling. "Tell her I died doing what huntresses do." "Tell her!" The words caught in her throat. She swallowed hard. "Tell her I love her. Tell them all I love them." Ruby turned to face the infinite space between worlds, raised her scythe, and drove it into the threshold like a stake through reality's heart. The gate convulsed. Ruby screamed, her body outlined in crimson and silver, as energies beyond human comprehension coursed through her. Her aura blazed one final time, not as protection, but as fuel, every ounce of her soul's light burning away to seal the wound she'd torn in the universe's fabric. Vross saw it all through his augmented eye, recorded every impossible second. Saw Ruby Rose smile one last time, even as her form began to crystallize into pure light. Saw her mouth final words that his lip-reading implants translated. "Some things are worth protecting." Then she was gone. The gate collapsed inward with a sound like the universe sighing in relief. Where the webway portal had stood for millennia, there was now only unmarked ferrocrete, as if it had never existed. No body, no weapon. No trace that Ruby Rose had ever stood between realities, and chosen to be the lock that sealed them apart. Except for a single rose petal, crystallized in silver light, that drifted down to rest at Vross's feet. He picked it up with trembling hands. It was solid, real, and impossibly warm in the underhive's perpetual cold. "What do we tell Lord Commander Guilliman?" Codicier Thrain asked quietly. Vross stared at the petal for a long moment, watching light dance within its crystalline structure. "We tell him the truth, that an anomaly from beyond our reality appeared, fought alongside the Imperium against the ruinous powers, and made the ultimate sacrifice to protect a world she'd known for less than a day." He closed his hand around the petal, feeling its warmth seep into his augmented flesh. "We tell him that hope is not a luxury," Vross continued, his voice hardening with newfound conviction. "It's a weapon, and we've been fools not to wield it." Brother Sergeant Corvin placed a massive gauntlet on the Inquisitor's shoulder. "They will call you heretic for such words. Let them." Vross turned away from the empty space where a gate had stood, where a girl had died, where something fundamental about the universe had shifted. "I have seen faith without the Emperor's name. I have seen sacrifice without promise of reward. If that is heresy, then perhaps heresy is what this Imperium needs." As they ascended toward the light, Vross kept the crystallized petal clutched in his hand. He would show it to Guilliman, would show it to anyone who claimed that only through the Emperor's divine will could humanity find the strength to endure. Ruby Rose had proven otherwise. She had been hope incarnate, and though the grim darkness had swallowed her, the light she'd kindled refused to be extinguished. In the highest spires of the Imperium, where decisions were made that affected trillions of lives, the reports would arrive. Records would be compiled. Questions would be asked about an Inquisitor who had allowed a Xenos anomaly to sacrifice itself rather than be properly purged. But in the Underhive, where Ruby had fought and died, something impossible began to happen. People spoke of the girl with the scythe who had faced demons for strangers, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was something beyond the Emperor's light worth believing in. Something smaller, more fragile, but no less real. Hope. And in the space between realities, in the liminal void where Ruby Rose's sacrifice held the boundaries of universes apart, something stirred. Not dead, not alive, but aware. A consciousness scattered across dimensions. Still protecting, still fighting, still refusing to let the darkness win. Some sacrifices, it turned out, were too stubborn to be final. But that story would have to wait for another telling. The galaxy had gained a martyr, and martyrs, the Imperium had learned across 10,000 years, were far more dangerous than warriors, especially ones who refused to stay dead. If you're enjoying this journey into the dark corners of the 41st millennium, where heroes from other worlds face the Imperium's brutal reality, then subscribe to Beyond the Lore. We bring you the deepest crossovers, the most epic battles, and the stories that ask what happens when hope meets the grim darkness of the far future. Hit that subscribe button, because Ruby's story has only just begun, and you won't want to miss what comes next.